Are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we'll basically build this from a blank worksheet. But if you do have access, there are 4 tabs down below: fretboard, example, practice, and blank. The fretboard tab having our simulated fretboard, which we will be referring back to. The example tab having the finished product that we will be working on this time, in essence, the answer key. The practice tab having pre-formatted cells so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting, putting your attention more on the music side of things. And the blank tab where we will be working, however, where we practice both our Excel formatting as well as the musical concepts, noting that those two things do go together because when we're trying to visualize music, oftentimes we have to visualize tables. And the best way to be able to visualize a table is to build a bunch of tables. Best way to build tables is with some kind of spreadsheet software, like, for example, Excel. So that's what we will be practicing with here. So we want to just build out and think about the musical alphabet, how it is traditionally formatted, and then we're going to add a numbering system. So let's go back to the example tab just to get an idea. We're just going to list out the traditional system, think about the sharps and flats and the problems kind of that they cause within the traditional system. Then we want to give a numbering system to it, and you can debate what the best numbering system is, but this is the one we will work on. We'll touch on that as we go. And then we're also thinking, how can I convert possible types of symbols and terminology which seem like they're almost intentionally complex or don't correlate easily into normal language as easily, at least a computer language, right? I'd like to make this a little bit easier so that I can type it out in something like Excel, because that will make it easier for me to manage around. So I'm going to do something a little bit different with the sharps and flats to get an idea of it. And then I'm going to combine these two things together, also wanting to visualize this whole thing both in a linear fashion as well as in a circular fashion. So we'll also try to make a circle, which is a little bit hard to do in Excel because it's not really designed for circles, but you can do it though. You can do it, and we will do it. So we can do that because we really want to remember that you're envisioning this as kind of a spiral, as though the number series goes up infinitely, down infinitely, but also has a repetitive component pitch-wise, so that you have this repeated component that is happening. We as human beings can't visualize this way. We have to visualize in a 2D format. So therefore, we choose the task that we are putting together and then think about which way to visualize our numbering system, linearly versus circularly, will best be suited to the task that we're trying to do at any given time. All right, so let's go back on over to the blank tab and say, all right, I'm just going to start in A1. Now, I like to lay down a fundamental formatting system before I type anything. So I just select the entire worksheet with the triangle. I'm going to right-click on the cells and lay down the foundational formatting. Format the cells. I'm in the numbers side. I go to currency. I like currency. And then sometimes I like to make the negative numbers bracketed, but for this purposes, I'm going to keep it with a negative sign. But I want to eliminate the dollar sign, and I don't want any decimals by default. So I will eliminate the decimals. Okay. Then go to the home tab, font group. I'm going to make it bold. You might not need to make it bold, but I think that's best for screen recording, and that'll just make everything bold by default. All right, so then I'm going to be up top in cell A. So I'm going to say first we're going to list out the notes. Right, and so I'm going to just list out the notes, and let's just leave it at that for now. What are the notes in our musical alphabet just as they are? They started out with let's actually make this black and white. I'm going to make this what I normally do with a header. I'm going to click on that one, home tab, font group, drop down, make it black, and this one I'm going to make it then white. Black and white. That's what I typically do with my headers, just to make them header looking like. So we typically have how many notes in our musical alphabet? It goes A to G, but then we normally have sharps and flats that are going to be laid in there. So we usually use capital letters. We have an A, and then when I'm going from top to bottom or A up to G, then I usually have sharps and we don't have any flats. So that's one of the things that we have to kind of understand conceptually. We've got these two names for notes, remembering that that's one of the things that seems unnecessarily complicated, but one which we can't completely eliminate, but will moderate to some degree by also adding a numbering system. That's what we have to do. Okay, so also just realize that you might ask, why don't I do the numbering system this way? A, and then this way, A sharp, and so on this way. And you could do it that way. There's nothing wrong. And sometimes that might be the best way to build a table. So just remember, the question in our mind is always, when you build a table, it seems like it's an easy thing to do, but this is the fundamental thing that comes up. Should I make it going this way? Where should my axes be, right? Should I list it this way, or should I list it vertically? The reason I think it's best vertically for our purposes here is because this is going to be the fundamental layer that we're then going to use to build everything else out, typically, if you were building something more complicated. And so normally it's nice to get this as tight as possible, and the column format is usually a bit more tight and simplified so that I can then use it as my reference data to build anything else I want from it on the right-hand side. Otherwise, you get this long thing, and it's hard to scroll to the right and then work on it. Now, you could scroll down and work on it. Why don't I scroll down and work on it? Because oftentimes I like to have my headers up top so I can make the wider headers if I need to. So this is generally the way I would normally do it, but you could, of course, have it go across this way, which we'll talk more about we might do in future presentations. Now, if you want to make an A sharp, you could use an A and then a shift 3 for that $sign. That's not technically like the symbol that they use. Now, if you want to go find all the music symbols, you can go to the Insert tab, Symbols, and then find the symbols in here. The other way you can do that to just shortcut it is to copy the symbol. So just go to ChatGTP or something and say, give me the music symbol for sharps and flats. And once you have it, then you could just copy and paste it. So I have it right here. I'm just going to grab that. I'm going to copy it. I know I'm cheating. I said I was doing it from a blank worksheet and I copied and pasted. But then I'm going to click in it and paste, right? I think that's the easiest thing to do. And I really think that some of these symbols that are being used, it's almost like a bureaucratic thing that they purposely chose symbols that are totally wonky that no normal person would have. Even back in the day when they made the symbol, they got these weird squiggly signs and whatnot. So it almost seems like that's like part of an initiation process. You have to learn all these weird symbols. But obviously what my goal here is to clean things up, right? I want to make it simple so that I can learn, so I can streamline the learning process for myself, which I would assume would also obviously be most useful to teach as many people as possible with it. So I want to lean away from the funky symbols, the weird symbols, as much as I can, because they're difficult to kind of grasp. And like what is this? That's a sharp. No, it's not a hashtag. It's a sharp. Okay, And so you get a little bit of wonkiness. So we'll deal with that by adding the numbering system, but this is the back and forth that you're going to have to deal with. Then you got a B, and then we have a C. Now notice there's no sharp or flat between, or sharp in this case. There's no B sharp that we're going to be putting in play here. That doesn't mean that in some cases, like you still have to have like nudging the C backwards or C flat or something. You can imagine funny voicings that you still end up doing when you put chords together or scales together. We'll talk more about that later, but we just want to mention that now. And why does this happen, by the way? And this, again, it's just the system that they came up with because they designed it off of a scale that has 7 notes, which happens to be the C major scale, and you can think of the diatonic related modes. So it's not like you'll hear people say that there's a natural half step between B and C. And it's not like there's a natural half step really. It's just that's because because they built it off a 7-note scale of C, right? That's why there's only a natural half step if you are looking from the perspective of the 7-note scale of C major. But again, that's like, in physics, where like you're looking at something and measuring from one perspective, not realizing that the other perspective is just as valid, right? You need to take into account the perspective. So we'll talk more about that later, but we'll just continue with the numbering system. So then you've got a C sharp. So C sharp, and I just copied and pasted that one. And then you have a D, and then you have a D, and then I'm going to paste the sharp. And then you've got an E, and then you've got an F, which once again they call a natural half step. Why is it a natural? It's not really natural. It's not in nature. It's just that we chose a particular formula, the key of C, and that's what's dictating the half steps that are being put into play. We'll talk more about that when we get into the modes, but we're then going to say we have an F sharp, and then we've got a G, and then we've got a G sharp. Whoop, Control V. All right, so I'm hitting Control V to paste those. Okay. Now then, what I typically like to do is to color code this. So I usually make it a different color. So I'm going to select the whole thing and then right click on it. And I like to make it, I'm going to go to format the cells, and I usually make it the color. Let's actually go up here, go to the home tab, font group, and then color code it to blue. And I'll put brackets around it. Hit the drop down, put brackets around it just to make it a little bit more clear. Boom. All right, and so then we're going to have the alt, I'm going to call it the alt names. Now notice if I put alt name, then I end up with this problem where this is getting a little bit long because I want this cell to be pretty small. See how the name is forcing me to have a longer cell than I would like? Because I'd like to make it this small, right? That's as tight as I can make it. But no, I have to make it this tight because of the title. Over here, I have to make it even larger. How can I deal with that? Well, one way is I could wrap the text. I can go to the Home tab, Alignment, and wrap the text. And so then I can make it smaller, and it wraps like automatically. There's a problem with that, however, though, and that is that it makes all the cells over here fat. And I don't want to make fat cells to the right because I'm going to want to work to the right. I want to leave all my cells skinny. So I'm going to undo that, and instead, whenever I have a long title, I'm going to copy this bit or cut it, Control V or Control X, and then Control V, put it down here. This way, now I have it on two cells. Now that's not great if I was to make a pivot table or something from it, because if I make a pivot table, I select the whole thing and I insert like a pivot table, and now I've got two heading lines. That's going to mess it up. But I'm not going to do a pivot table, therefore this will make it a little bit clearer. I want to make that the header. But now I have a problem though, because this one started here. How can that be the header when this is, I need to pull this whole thing down to make this work. How can I pull it down? Well, I could select the whole thing and then grab it and grab it down. That makes the most sense. Undo. The easier way to do it, however, is to insert a cell above it, making sure to push the whole thing down and not to the side. So how do you do that? I select the cell right here. It's going to naturally want to insert above it. I could select the whole column, by the way, but let's just do one cell and say insert, and then I want to shift the cells down. So shift everything down so you can put a cell above it. Boom. And there it is. So now I put it there. It formatted it like the one above it. That's what I want. So that's good. And now I can select this one, make it a header formatting, font group. I'll make this black, white, and then I'm going to alignment and center it. There we go. Now this one is now at the top. I'd like to have it at the bottom if there's only one word. So I'm going to copy and paste that down here. Delete this one. And now I can make this alternative name. I'm going to double click between these cells as tight as possible. So what's the alternative name? Well, if I count it up the other way, then I'd have to start at G sharp, which if I'm going backwards, I should call A flat. Now you could use an AB with a small b, but that's not exactly the sign. You're supposed to use